Welcome to today's webinar. We will begin shortly as we wait for attendees joining us from our virtual lobby. Again, welcome to those who have just joined us. We will begin shortly. Hello, and welcome to today's American College of Healthcare Executives webinar, Beyond the OR, Why Leading Health Systems Are Integrating into Perioperative Services. I'm your host, Nancy O'Brien, Development Specialist for ACHE. Thank you for joining us. Before we begin, let's review a few items to assist you in participating in today's event. Next slide, please. Audio will be heard through your computer speakers. Please adjust your volume accordingly. In the event you are having issues with your connection, we recommend exiting out of your browser and restarting the Zoom session. Interaction during today's webinar is available through the Q&A. You will have the opportunity to submit questions to today's presenters by placing your questions into the Q&A box. You may send in your questions at any time during the presentation. We will address questions during the Q&A session at the end of today's presentation. For your convenience, the link to the presentation for today's webinar was included in the webinar reminder email from ACHE. It was sent to everyone about an hour ago. Today's event will offer each participant 1 hour of qualifying education credit. Credits for this webinar are self-reported. To receive your credit, visit myache.org and select My Education Credit on the right-hand side of the screen. Scroll down to the self-reported credits section and add your credit. Today's program is being recorded and will be available following the webinar. Each of you will receive a follow-up email from ACHE, which will include a link to an evaluation form for today's presentation. We value your feedback and invite you to take a few minutes to share your input. Next slide, please. I'd like to take this opportunity to note this webinar is made possible in part by the support of Jackson Healthcare, an ACHE premier corporate partner, and their commitment to ACHE's vision and mission to advance our members and healthcare leadership excellence. You will find information on Jackson Healthcare in the corporate partner section of ache.org. Next slide. It is now my pleasure to introduce everyone to our powerhouse panel for today's program. Preston Smith, President, Premier Anesthesia, part of Jackson Healthcare, brings over 20 years of healthcare leadership experience and is a fellow of the American College of Healthcare Executives. Preston began his career as a healthcare attorney representing hospitals and medical practices specializing in hospital law, medical malpractice defense, physician practices, dispute resolution, and litigation. Preston has also served as a senator in the Georgia General Assembly, chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, and has led in Chief Revenue Officer and Chief Compliance Officer roles. Next slide. Dr. Anthony Dominic, Medical Director, Mount Carmel East, Mount Carmel Health, is a board-certified anesthesiologist pursuing superior patient care, customer service, transformational leadership, and operational management. Anthony has vast experience as an owner-operator of several non-health related businesses, giving him a unique perspective on business and administrative services. Next slide. And Ken Gillis, Director of Perioperative Services, Mount Carmel East, is a senior healthcare executive with more than 25 years of leadership experience in surgical and perioperative services across diverse healthcare settings. Ken currently leads operational strategy and performance improvement initiatives within a high acuity surgical environment and specializes in operational turnaround, data-driven performance optimization, and building high-performance teams. Next slide. Over the next hour, Anthony, Ken, and Preston will describe how the role of anesthesia is expanding beyond intraoperative care into full perioperative services and identify governance and organizational models that support effective anesthesia perioperative integration. And now it is my pleasure to turn it over to Preston to begin our program. Preston?
Thank you, Nancy, and welcome to everyone that's here. We're excited to see the interest in attending this webinar, and I'm pleased to serve with these distinguished guests on the panel. The anesthesia industry and the provision of care in anesthesia across hospitals and ambulatory surgery centers is undergoing historic stress. And there is a tremendous problem that is being solved every day in the perioperative services area in the provision of care to patients. Why is there so much stress right now? Well, we're about 180 years into the process of providing anesthesia to patients. I think everyone's of agreement that we're not going back to the days of biting leather straps or even bullets. In fact, not only are we not going back, but we are experiencing historic demand on anesthesia, increased demand for patient care services. Every single day, 10,000 baby boomers retire in America. They're living longer, they're having more procedures and surgeries done, and so there's a tremendous demand placed on anesthesia care. At the same time, we are also going through a historic shortage of anesthesia providers, both clinical providers on the physician side and the advanced practice clinicians, AAs and CRNAs. And so the confluence of those two things, the surge of demand and the significant shortage of clinical labor is causing a great deal of stress in the system. And it is highlighted and underscored a really importance of integrating the anesthesia perioperative services throughout the continuum of care. Increasing stress on that already incredible model is the fact that right now, CMS has been on a 20-year path of reducing anesthesia reimbursement for patient care services, the professional fees. And what that has done is shifted the cost over onto hospitals and ambulatory surgery centers. That has added additional increased stress to the system. So we wanted to look at this executive problem. What happens when anesthesia operates in a transactional role rather than as an integrated perioperative partnership? What problems does that cause? And what is the alternative to providing strong solutions that open up throughput, efficiencies, and effectiveness, ultimately stronger patient care and better bottom lines for the operations of the OR? So I'm very excited to share a little bit about the high-level side, but I'm even more excited to have the people that are working in the trenches every day making this successful to share, and that would be Dr. Dominic and Ken in the ORs. What are some of the symptoms that there is a problem due to the stress in the system? Well, OR access is the biggest one. We have that increasing demand that I'm talking about with a reduced ability for hospitals and surgery centers to make available patient care and serve the patients. Number two, you have siloed teams that limits flexibility. You have anesthesia teams, surgical teams, nursing teams, administrative teams, and oftentimes they're striving towards similar goals, but they're not working in an integrated fashion to really succeed at a higher level. Anesthesia services are often misaligned with the actual surgical services that are in the hospital setting, and that creates a great deal of missed opportunity for optimization, coordination, and throughput improvement. Ultimately, this leads to patient care issues and certainly customer service and experiential issues. So we wanted to examine the problem and look at what happens when you do something different and view anesthesia as an integrated model across the continuum of care. And ultimately, what we believe you'll see is improved patient outcomes, better efficiency and optimization. And I'm going to turn next to Dr. Dominic to talk a little bit about the practical aspect from the provider's view of the traditional role versus this partnership model.
Thank you, Preston. The transactional role is a bit more of a traditional role in which the anesthesia team or anesthesia members predominantly focus on clinical care only, and it would be more of how do we get in? How do we get out? And they really did not integrate much into the surgical services team other than from a clinical care perspective. And so that led to limited responsibility beyond the operating room, even though healthcare organizations require anesthesia now to be far outside of the operating room, including cath labs, endos, IR areas, ED for different blocks. There's just so many areas. And so this model is predominantly stressed at most organizations. And so we have looked at how do we create more of a partnership model by which we create an anesthesia team that certainly focuses on clinical care, but also now begins to partner with the hospital from an operational point of view. And many organizations will kind of view that and understand the concept of it, but the way that they build that team isn't necessarily always having success from it. And so we look to this partnership and we predominantly say, well, look, you need on-site medical director leadership. And many organizations frequently think, well, we have a chairman of anesthesia, and that's really not the person. It may or may not be the person, but you're looking for a medical director that has knowledge, skills, and experience in business and operations and operational throughputs and essentially how to build teams together. And so you'll hear frequently one team. We mentioned sometimes we have different teams, perioperative team, anesthesia team. I tend to view it as one team and we're all working for the patient. And so a lot of the hospitals that we've worked with have administrative governance over surgical services, but the anesthesia team, specifically an anesthesiologist, doesn't necessarily function at the level such as the OR director, where they co-manage all services together. And so it's critically important to align the hospital's goals with the anesthesia team. And so the anesthesia team has to come in and understand how we focus and we work with the hospital to create one team versus multiple different teams. And we'll kind of go through a lot of different specific ways of how to build that, but it ultimately comes down to people and processes. Have the right team in place, have the right leadership qualities within the anesthesia medical director, and then begin to work with administration and also the OR director and the surgeons to improve successes.
Yeah, I think that's really good. I think it's worthwhile to consider that when most people are considering the problem, sort of like the fire burning that day, the most immediate thing that jumps out is how do we operationalize more coverage? How do we get staff over to this other room? How do we add this patient on? Those are critical and they're day-to-day, hour-by-hour decisions that have to be made. But when you're stepping back to design a program that really functions effectively, you have to step back and re-examine the goals and remember what we're trying to accomplish together and what the shared goals are if you're going to create integrations within the team. So I like to think about it like we really have three joint goals. We're trying to create high quality of care for the patients. We're trying to create an integrated management system across that continuum of care. And then we're trying to deliver exceptional customer service. So those are three goals that are shared by the surgeons, by the proceduralists, by the nursing staff, the administration, and the anesthesia team. How do we get there? How do we achieve those three goals together as a group that functions in separate teams, even though we're working together as one team in the OR? And I think that's where we look at these lanes. And this next slide really talks about what those lanes are: the care delivery lane, the performance lane for the operations, and the clinical leadership and accountability lane. An integrated system means that anesthesia and surgical services are going to operate as one coordinated system, as you said, Dr. Dominic, and they're aligned on goals, the goals that I've outlined. They're accountable to the outcomes, and that's critical, and they're actively managing the entire perioperative continuum. And I think that's really critical. If you have integration, and you don't have decision clarity or a governance structure that everyone understands, then it's going to fail. You're going to have a confusing, unclear set of processes where you can't escalate things quickly and get to a decision, and everyone can't work together as separate parts of the same single body, if you will. So what does that require? Well, Shared focus across these pillars creates success. In the delivery of care, it's engagement across all sectors. It's the standardization of the care pathways, both in nursing, the surgeon's protocols, anesthesia's protocols as well, from preoperative all the way through perioperative and postoperative care. Looking at the operations, is there a coordinated management of the flow all the way across in the handoffs that happens through that continuum? And do you have flexibility of staffing? Because if you overstaff, that is done at a tremendous cost to the hospital and to the operation. And you also got the wrong people, you got the people in the wrong places. So you might have extra staff and not enough coverage, if that makes sense. You might have staff in the main ORs that aren't available or flexible to cover, interventional radiology or the ancillary services where anesthesia is needed. That can also constrain you to the point where you don't also have services to create emergency airways in the ER or, manage a critical patient up in the ICU. So having that flexibility of staffing is critical to accomplishing these shared goals. And then again, I go back to in the last column, that clear governance structure allows all of this to operate within the same framework. And part of how we get there is we share metrics together and we work on achieving those same metrics. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Dr. Dominic to talk about the patient journey.
Thank you, Preston. So the leadership role I'm going to start with, again, that's our medical director, who basically has two main areas that individual is overseeing, and that is the clinical services and the operational services. And so as a leader, this individual focuses on education and inspiration to the team. So we've often found that it's not good enough to explain to people what the tasks are that have to be done. We have to explain the why behind it all. And so while we're building a team, those are a couple of the main things behind that their main goals for at least me with my practices. And so the clinical services is certainly one area that we operate together with. We have aligned goals with this. We develop different algorithms and protocols for the specifics anesthesia in all of these different areas. We work with the surgeons. We work with the different nurses in those areas. As I personally develop these services and develop the different pathways, I like to collaborate with the surgeons, with the nurses, and not necessarily just the leaders. To me, it's very important to put everybody together. Again, the one team, those of us that are all going to be doing it. And so as the medical director and the OR director, we are guiding folks through these different areas. And then there's the operational management. And the operational management is something that's not necessarily a skill that a lot of anesthesiologists are obviously trained for, but it is important for this day and future anesthesia models to also be focused and have knowledge and education in different business areas. And so we can not only focus just on the anesthesia services itself, but we focus on surgical services. And that my involvement and working with Ken is far greater than just the anesthesia. It's all of surgical services, because that's what the community is basically saying. That's what the surgeons need. And so we put these two different silo teams, meaning nursing and anesthesia, together to be able to provide that service for the community.
Thank you, Dr. Dominic. So as we all know, running a surgical department is a complex, very high stakes operation where coordination, timing, accountability can really directly impact not just the patients, but the staff well-being, and very importantly in this day and age, the financial performance of the organization. When key operational elements really break down, there's a ripple effect that goes across the organization. Dr. Dominic and I have spent a good deal of our careers doing turnarounds and trying to optimize operations so that we can make good decisions that are fiscally responsible, that really provide leadership, structure, stability to the organization that we happen to be with. And the good thing about some of what you're going to hear today is you don't need teams of consultants to do this. You need to have two willing parties that will talk to each other in an open fashion, share a vision, bring anesthesia and their skill set into the fold because they are going to have skills that we're just not going to have on the operations side or the nursing side. So we're really trying to approach problems in a comprehensive, efficient way. And while today we're really talking about or referencing a level 2 trauma center with a moderate amount of ORs and hybrid rooms, the lessons from today really can apply to an ASC, to a critical access hospital, to a community hospital. There's no end or limit to how this process can help your organization, which I think is really very important. So, as always, there's challenges when you first walk into a new organization. And what we have found when we walked in, keeping in mind Dr. Dominic and I started within just a couple of months of each other, when you're talking about operational and clinical leadership challenges, we found that there was a lack of clear direction. There's inconsistent decision making. Staff morale really starts to decline when you have leadership voids or leadership that is really just reactive or unclear. It increases burnout, turnover, and ultimately it affects your quality and patient safety. And when it comes to ownership, readiness, flow, if everybody owns it, nobody owns it. There has to be a designated leadership team that people know. If I have an issue, I'm going to go and it's going to be addressed, it's going to be escalated. And it really takes the whole team to make sure that we comprehensively address issues as they come up. And Dr. Dominic spent a lot of time talking back and forth about either issues that he's seen or heard, or I've seen and heard, and how we can put our heads together and make the issues resolve themselves very quickly and easily. And certainly inadequate staffing to meet the operational demand. Preston has already touched on this, but if I have 3 teams and anesthesia only has 1 team, we're stalling out the operations. Or if I want to grow or open a couple of rooms and he doesn't have the staff for it, there's always a rub. Then you get finger pointing. Then, of course, the friction really starts. So Dr. Dominic and I, we really spend a lot of time just looking at our teams, making sure that we have good alignment, making sure that we're making the best fiscal decisions for the organization. And it sounds like it may be time consuming, but I would suggest we make ourselves much more efficient because a 30-second conversation can really solve a lot of problems. And if you have a limited or no shared visibility into the data and the performance, we're all on different planes at that point. I might be concentrating on turnover times. Dr. Dominic may be concentrating on first case on-time starts. When really they're all important and you need a strategic, comprehensive plan in order to deal with this effectively.
So governance and operating model enhancements. These are 3 specific areas that are really important to be able to have that integrated partnership. The perioperative leadership triad is one that I briefly touched upon earlier. In many organizations, they have an administrative committee that kind of oversees the surgical services and all of the block utilizations. I have found throughout my career that frequently the surgeons and myself find it not very effective. And so it's not properly led. There's generally where surgeons come and have lots of issues and share those issues with everyone. And so what we did was to say, look, this is a committee and it's going to consist of anesthesia, an executive sponsor, and certainly the nursing leadership. And while it's important to hear all of the different issues, what we have found is that with this triad in place and we limit the number of people to it, we begin to then go hear our customer, figure out what issues they have and apply solutions to it because, again, of an aligned and only one team. And so it takes a little time, but eventually it works quite successfully. But it does come out of this governance model. And this governance model, ultimately, the full authority of it comes from senior administration. And so when we put this in place, also at some places I've been to, some of the OR directors aren't used to anesthesia having such an input and involvement in managing all of this. And so those three individuals need to be aligned and also kind of uh, basically with the understanding that administration would like this change to happen. And it's always important to put the right team even in this place. But with improved communications and really trying to understand the surgeon and their needs, it works quite well. Again, this is not where anesthesia just goes in and does a case and goes home for the day. This is that medical director that I talked about. This is the leadership that's involved, where there's certainly clinical oversight as well. But this begins the process to align us, and it comes out of this particular type of setting.
And when we're looking at standard daily, weekly operating cadence, what does that really mean? High reliability organizations really have structured and very predictable systems. And so what we tend to do is in the mornings, there will be a huddle with anesthesia, a huddle with nursing, and then a combined huddle. It'll start at about 6:45. It'll end about 7:05. And what that really does is it allows time for questions to get answers by each of the separate teams because some information is applicable to only one group. But then the common goals for the day from setting the schedule, how you're going to do turnovers, how we're going to interact with the surgeons and patients, that really is an important part of what we do. Then later in the day, again, OR management and anesthesia management will come together. They will really look at how the cases are flowing, what problems we're having. Is there a solution at hand? How are we going to run the next couple of days? And then going back to the data on a weekly basis at least, although we do this much more frequently, Dr. Dominic and I, we're looking at the data and we're really trying to make things as efficient as we can without causing undue stress on anyone. And these small 1 and 2 minute increments of improvement really have an effect across the whole day. Then when we're talking about one team, it isn't just jargon that we talk about. We're really talking about it as one team. If a surgeon comes and he wants to do something and we're not able to accommodate it, it's not anesthesia can't do it or the OR can't do it. It's we can or we cannot do it. And that really has improved morale of all of our colleagues, no matter what division they happen to be employed by, because we're all rowing in the same direction. The surgeons appreciate the fact that they can get one consistent answer. They don't have to run around from person to person. Clear handoffs between divisions occur on a much more regular basis. And we even extend our one team out beyond the OR walls and the procedural area walls. Dr. Dominic and I spent a good month when we first arrived meeting with every director for every patient care unit in the hospital. And that really bought us a lot of goodwill and opened up the lines of communication so we could be successful. So really it comes down to what changed day to day. When you're talking about standardization and scalability across the continuum, we really reduced a lot of variability within our processes. Checklists that maybe were haphazardly used or consistently used. Instrument trays are really processed in advance. Anesthesia is very structured in how they see their patients it makes the whole system really work better. The improved communication, the reduction in errors, when everybody's talking, everybody knows the plan, everybody has a chance to really troubleshoot the plan. I've been to many organizations where anesthesia really didn't interact as well as I would like to have seen, and therefore things get missed and fingers start pointing. And that is not something that we see here. The extra communication, the extra transparency really provides a layer of safety that just adding another resource can't buy. The quality outcomes have improved tremendously. Our OR flows are efficient. We have some of the best turnaround times in our system. Again, Dr. Dominic and I are really looking at the data on a very regular basis. Resource utilization, which is so important in this financial time that we're living through, we try to be very responsible with the organization's resources. Capacity management is very important. We want to get people through the system as quickly and as easily as possible. Our teams are aligned. The culture has improved greatly in 2 years. And then when we're looking through where can we improve going forward, we can agree on protocols up front so we can cut down on the frustration of nurses trying to call and get clarification. And all of this leads to really stronger financial performance and cost control.
Ken, I think you're going to speak to this.
The door, our first came out, and within 12 months, we went to 80%. Surgeon satisfaction has really improved. And this really improved because Dr. Dominic and I are on the floor all the time, and we solve problems in the moment. We don't wait for something to bubble up. Our administrative meetings, we're going around half of the time trying to encourage people to come to the meetings and bring new issues because they really don't have complaints that you would normally see coming out of a surgeon committee. Our complex surgery close to cut time was reduced, less than 57 minutes. And our turnovers for, again, a complex surgery trauma center, less than or equal to 26 minutes. And one of the things I think Dr. Dominic and I are most proud of, when we walked in the door, we had a very high percentage, 75% of travel locum staff at a minimum. And we were able to recruit many of the people that came here on our travel assignment. And our rate now in the OR is about 5% travelers in 18 months. And Dr. Dominic has almost a full roster full of full-time people. So the results are really tangible when you just work together.
I want to go back to the beginning where we started on this webinar. Anesthesia was first administered on March the 30th of 1842, a little trivia for today, by Dr. Crawford Long, a surgeon in Georgia. And there's a little controversy over that because over the next few years, a few other people would also administer anesthesia, and one published it before Dr. Long did. But even today, on March 30th, we celebrate National Doctors Day because of that first administration of anesthesia in a surgical theater. Prior to that, so a little over 180 years ago, prior to the discovery of anesthesia, the surgery was critical as it related to speed for two very important reasons. Number one, it was extraordinarily barbaric and painful for patients. You can imagine performing surgery without anesthesia was an agonizing experience for patients, and so they did it as quick as they possibly could for that reason. And the second was they didn't fully understand this at the time, but the longer the surgery lasted, the more exposure there was and the worse the outcome there was. We later understood that to be germ theory and the introduction of bacteria and illness that could come from prolonged exposure in an environment that wasn't clean. here we are 180 something years later, and we're back to talking about speed and efficiency, but for very different reasons. Anesthesia's come a long way. The environment has changed. The process is by and large painless if it works correctly, but efficiency still matters. And efficiency still matters because of the demand on the system, the limitations on the clinical labor that's available, the importance of integrating those systems in one continuum of care to accomplish those three goals we talked about: high quality of patient care, and integrated management across the continuum of care, and exceptional customer service for the patient's experience. And so that brings us to, okay, efficiency matters. Efficiency requires an integrated system, not a siloed system. And as you all know, depending on your perspective and where you work and how you touch the healthcare system, there are a lot of different models out there, and some of them are not only not integrated, but they're adversarial even at times, because you have almost a competition or a finger pointing exercise when things go wrong, or when the needs expand with that stress on the system. So what is the playbook? We wanted to, as we bring this towards the close, we wanted to give you a repeatable playbook, not a vendor model or a theoretical framework, but actually one that works in practice. So I want to touch on 6 specific points briefly. Number one, just like in medicine, you shouldn't prescribe before you diagnose. You should understand what's happening and look at the problem and understand it before you go to the solution. And I think too often organizations jump to an immediate conversation about coverage and staffing before they really understand what's happening. The effect of that is you're throwing money, resources, people at a problem that may scale the problem instead of solving it. And so that's why diagnosing and understanding the constraints in the system helps. The real work it starts where you understand where the flow breaks down, the readiness, the decision-making capability, the ability to escalate, and the accountability and the shared metrics in the system. So all of that requires, the constraint of diagnosis, because staffing changes alone simply won't stick. If you've got a problem, you cover up with additional people or resources. So number one is diagnose. Number two is define. And I think here I would point back to something Dr. Dominic's focused on, which was governance as an inflection point. The integration system will fail if decision rights are unclear and if there's not a clear path to escalation. So that clear governance structure and escalation allows the teams to operate in real time and quickly, and honestly make better decisions. So that requires some definition around governance. It's about aligning the operation and not simply expanding clinical authority, but defining those channels and what happens when escalation is necessary in the governance structure. So some definition around on that is critical. 3 is establishing operational cadence. Why is that? Well, cadence predicts predictability. Cadence creates predictability. And you've got to have some muscle memory built in order to operate quickly and efficiently in the system. So that's where these daily and weekly operating rhythms come in, where you turn issues into shared problems instead of surprises, and it turns away from finger pointing into problem solving exercises. So the dashboards can be tools, but throwing dashboards at OR directors or clinical staff and so forth doesn't actually solve any problems. They're inundated with data and information. Cadence and muscle memory is what makes these things actionable. So predictability is what the surgeons and the staff, the executives and the teams ultimately trust, and it's critical to success. Number 4 is alignment, aligning the staffing to the strategy. And I would say that, and this is critical, staffing follows the strategy, not the other way around. So get your strategy first and then design the staffing around what fits your strategy. Oftentimes people create the staffing they can and then build the strategy, and that typically doesn't work. So once you have governance and cadence that are clear, staffing becomes more of an execution conversation rather than the building blocks that you create your strategy around. So the goal isn't just coverage, that's important, but you've got to have flexibility, you've got to have sustainability, you've got to have alignment to the demand and have the right people in the right place at the right time. And so that mix of clinical and operational leadership is going to be critical on your staffing piece. Number 5 is standardization. We mentioned this earlier, but really the secret to scale is going to be standardizing, removing as much variability as you can from the model, creating common pathways and protocols that reduce friction in the system and variability. Standardization will allow the teams to focus their energy on the complex and unusual cases, not on the routine care coordination that should be expected as part of the daily activities. So build those daily activities into the rhythm and then focus on the extraordinary cases that really do require variability. And finally, accountability sustains performance. So the integration will only hold and stick when the accountability is shared across the entire care continuum, end to end. So when you have anesthesia teams, surgical teams, perioperative services, when they all own outcomes together, then that flow will stabilize and you'll begin to see consistency and stabilization across from the pre-op, perioperative, and postoperative process. So what are the key takeaways and why does it matter to us? A few key points here. The core takeaway is this: perioperative integration is not about reorganizing departments. So I hope that's not what you heard. It's more about aligning the governance, the teams, and the execution around the flow. So when anesthesia operates as an integrated partner across that continuum of care, then you have access that improves for patients. You don't have, for example, patients that go NPO, the night before, wait for the ability to be added on to a case spot that's open up in the OR schedule. Anesthesia is not available. They're in the wrong place. They can't get to that patient. The patient is hungry. They're a little cranky. End of the day comes around. They punt the surgery, send them back to the floor, feed them, rest them. Now they're NPO again, coming back the next day. That could happen for several days in some cases. You got an upset patient. You don't have great care being delivered. You've got a family that's understandably not happy, and the system breaks down. So you want that performance to become predictable, and the results will follow. So that's really the key. You want anesthesia to operate as a strategic partner. Ken mentioned this. You want really anesthesia to be working closely at the board level, operating with the whole continuum of care. You want to have that aligned governance and the standardized workflows with real-time visibility to drive the results that you want. Ultimately, remember, you're coming back to those 3 shared goals: high quality care for the patients, an integrated continuum of management, and excellent customer service. And if you focus with the right team clinically, operationally, and culturally, then you can have sustained performance that operates at a much higher level. And that focused execution will deliver measurable results. And it really makes anesthesia part of a critical element of success in the whole perioperative process, rather than the limitation to why you can't do more, why you can't unlock more flow and more throughput through your ORs. So we believe anesthesia is critical. We think it's not specific to any particular vendor. It's more about the methodology and the process, and critically, the integration into the whole operative theater and the process across the continuum of care. And I think that's been a great focus for Dr. Dominic and for Ken. And with Nancy, with that, I'm gonna leave it with Ken to close us out with a practical example of how this kind of came together for him, and then we will turn it back over to you for Q&A.
Thanks, Preston. There's really 2 things that I want to point out. As we look back at our time together and the changes that we made and the great results that we've had, if we were to go out and poll administration, they would say, hey, financially, we've seen a lot of benefit. But if we went to poll our customers, and I would consider our colleagues and our surgeons the customers, what they would probably tell us is that the integration of OR management with the anesthesia and the one team concept really, they have a lot of confidence in our leadership, and we've had a lot of confidence shown to us by the staff who have, in a city like this, a multitude of places to work, and then choose to come with us. And it's not because of any benefit or any monetary amount of money. It's really because they enjoy working here, because we've ironed out wrinkles that they seem to encounter at other places. And so to close out, a strong peri-op integration playbook is not really just operational, it's really strategic. And in high performing organizations, anesthesia is not adjacent, they're integrated. And it really multiplies the value that they bring to the whole perioperative enterprise. And if anyone on the call is really thinking that this seems a little bit overwhelming, let me assure you that it really isn't. But I would always remind myself, and you can see on the back wall, change starts with me. So I would encourage you to think about that. And I thank you for your time, and I would turn it back to Nancy.
Thank you, Ken, Anthony, and Preston for sharing your insights, expertise, and strategy. As a reminder, to submit a written question or comment, please type your question into the Q&A box. Please note we will address as many questions as possible. If we do not get to your question, please refer to the additional contact information which is available on the question side in your handout, directing your questions to Peter Martin. So let's get started. First question, what were the early signals or red flags that told your leadership team the traditional anesthesia coverage model wasn't working? And how did you build the internal case for change? Ken, we'll start with you.
That is a great question. I think the real early signals really encompassed a couple of things. We were operating with different priorities. The anesthesia team had one priority, the administrative team had a different priority. When you have conflicting priorities, really what happens is no one is happy with the results at the end of the day. If the anesthesia's priority is to finish as many cases as they can and get to their car, patient care.
And I think your video is frozen. Okay, I think we have you back.
So sorry. So definitely, it's better when you align priorities. The second thing is we all have to act as one team, and we didn't. We had nursing staff, anesthesia staff, administrative staff, surgeons, all with different priorities. Nobody was talking to each other. That couldn't stand. We had to bring the groups together. We had to have open conversations, and that's where we really started.
Thank you, Ken. Anthony, Preston, care to add?
I think the one thing I want to add about communications is to give you an example. It's kind of interesting now. We're several years into this, and sometimes a member of his team will say, "Hey, where's Ken? I have a question." And I'll say, "Oh, I don't know where he's at." And they'll say, "I'll just ask you. You guys are going to talk about it anyways." And so that the teams most importantly know that the free flowing of information, which starts with me and Ken, gets down to them as well. And so it's pretty common. Sometimes I'm in a huddle and they may say, "Well, no one from surgery's here." And I kind of look around, they're like, oh, he's here. We could go ahead and go forward. And so it is gradually becoming just well understood. Again, the one team concept means we're all working together here.
I would add that one of the signs of a dysfunctional team is information begins to break down. And there are a lot of signs of that. And most people, when you begin to diagnose it, they kind of acknowledge, yep, I knew that. I might not have been able to put my finger right on it. But when you don't have a healthy environment of a cooperative team that's integrated, that has a high degree of trust, then information begins to become siloed and not flow, and that will destroy the effectiveness of the whole system. And how do you get there? You get there because by building trust and by exercising empathy with each other, the shared concept of the goals we're trying to achieve together. Empathy plays a big role in that. If people don't know that you care, they won't care that you know. And so they just won't share information, and that's a dysfunction that leads to finger pointing, breakdown in the process, and so forth. And so when you begin to see elements of a dysfunctional team like that, the integration is failing, and that's a time to step back and look at your strategy and try to diagnose what's happening.
Thank you, gentlemen. You mentioned the perioperative leadership triad as a governance model. How did you define decision rights between anesthesia, nursing, and surgical leadership? And what happens when those parties disagree in real time? And we'll lead this question to Anthony.
Most organizations tend to have some similar structure like that in place, as I mentioned, but they're not necessarily very high functioning because it really just becomes a meeting where the surgeons come to voice a lot of their concerns, which they have real concerns in their issues, but you can't really get any solutions. And so the first thing we did was decide to reduce the number of people. The way that it is certainly the anesthesia medical director and the OR nursing director are key components of that. But it's also to identify which surgeons would like to be part of that, who can create solutions and not just necessarily have opinions about how to do things. And so we looked into our surgeons to see who would like to take an active role in that. And we identified those folks and invited them to the committee, reduced the other members, and then we begin to work on issues really on a day-to-day level. So when you come to our committee meetings now, certainly we review things, but the majority of the solutions are created on a day-to-day basis. And then part of this also is beginning to educate and inspire the surgeons how this type of committee is going to be effective for them. And gradually, and this does happen, you end up getting them more involved also in this integrated partnership and not someone who just wants to come and voice particular opinions that may not create solutions again. And so what happens when there's one specific topic? The answer is all three of us work together on it because, again, it's a one team. And so any solutions have to come from all of us collectively together.
Very good. Thank you, Anthony. Question from David. What level of engagement does your triad team utilize with block scheduling management from a governance perspective? And he would love to hear about any success you have had in this area. And Ken, we'll kick that off with you.
So I think that is really a great question. And Dr. Dominic and I, just a week ago, went through the Surgical Administrative Committee and we adjusted a lot of blocks down. And what we do as a general rule is we're watching the numbers all the time. We know who is starting to back off of their block utilizations, and we start having conversations with them before the meeting. And I think that really is key because the last thing anyone wants is to walk into a meeting and then hear for the first time that they're not going to have their full block allotment when they walk out the door. And when we approach them in advance, we're giving them the data, we're telling them what we're seeing, what we're feeling. Sometimes we'll learn that it's an office clerical issue that they're not releasing their time. Sometimes it's they've missed a period of time where it was a personal issue that they had to deal with and they would come back. So we take that into account. But we've been able to adjust blocks up and down very freely because we use a very tried and true communication style, and we don't surprise anybody, and we've gotten support all throughout the meetings.
I think if I can add to that, one thing too, to get a little bit more specific is we generally manage our rooms because it's more access to care through either blocks or open rooms. And so the surgeons want to make sure they can get cases on for their patients, and so do we. And so we always have about a 6 to 8 hour area where we can add cases to them. And so once they realize we're really trying to accommodate them and their patients, they begin to be, again, more of a partner to us and discussing what blocks they really need. And then, like Ken said, it's really our schedulers and a few other leaders from Ken frequently speak to their offices. And when we have some blocks that are trending in the downward position, it's almost a weekly discussion, kind of, hey, you're sitting there talking to the surgeon, and you just try to ask him, like, what's going on? Why do you think your volumes are going down? It's not really just a numbers game. We're going to reduce your block. Again, it's that partnership level with the surgeons to figure out what's going on as well.
The other thing to add to that is removing some of the subjectivity and creating an objective look is helpful. And the top three ways to do that is with data, data, and data. So if you pull, the actual minutes in the OR and the utilization of the blocks and the rooms, that allows you to really look at how the rooms are being used, which surgeons are using those for what cases and so forth. And the reason that's important is because all of us have perceptions, and our perceptions of what we're using is sometimes different than what we're actually using. And so if you can sit down with the triad of the leadership and look at the data, it will oftentimes the answers will just appear. I mean, it will be very clear what's happening versus what we all think is happening. And so I would encourage you to really dig into the data as a solution option.
I actually use a stoplight kind of sign. So anything less than 50% utilization gets a red, 51 to 75 gets a yellow, anything above that gets a green. And we focus on the reds and the very, very low reds to figure out how we can help them.
Thank you, gentlemen. I'm going to try to fit in two more questions, so I'll ask you to be brief in your response. Andrew asks, what role can anesthesia play in optimizing the patient for surgery? For example, PAT algorithms, ERA protocols, etc. And Anthony, could you start with that?
Sure. We have several different ways to do that depending on which organization we're dealing with, because some organizations have different systems. So the PAT area is run by internal medicine, some it's run by the hospitalist group, some is run by anesthesia. So it has some variability to it. But ultimately, we are actively involved regardless of even if it's the hospitalist. We meet with them frequently. We are called to those patients when they're in the PAT department. We absolutely develop algorithms and protocols to kind of triage the patients, which the cardiologist and the internist, I like everybody's input on it, so we own that document. And then ultimately at the huddles, PAT is always coming to our meetings and saying, hey, here's heads up on a cardiac clearance they're working on for Thursday, and they're keeping us abreast of those.
Very good. This will be our last question, gentlemen. Kalina asks, is the example hospital, Mount Carmel East and Grove City, being discussed an employed or contracted anesthesia group? And what recommendations do you have for creating buy-in from contracted anesthesia services? And Preston, I will leave that with you.
Sure. So it's a contracted group, but I will tell you that I think the principles we're discussing today are a little bit agnostic as to what type of arrangement you have. And in some models, it makes more sense to do one versus the other. And there are all kinds of hybrids. There are employed models where there are management groups that are assisting with that. There's certainly full contracted services groups out there. I would say there's not a cookie cutter approach to that. But I think more importantly, implementing these principles with anesthesia is anesthesia, and these principles can be applied throughout whatever model you're going to use. I don't think it makes any difference, honestly, in this subject, this context that we're discussing, whether it's a contracted group or employed group or some kind of hybrid. I think it's critical that we establish these governance structures and have an integrated team. And you can do that a little differently in an employed model than a contracted model. And there's some tools you can use if they're employees versus contracted teams. But when you get down to it, you're following the same playbook for the same reasons to accomplish the same goals. So I would say that ultimately it probably doesn't matter whether it's what type of anesthesia group it is. What matters is that you adopt an integrated playbook, and that unlocks the throughput that we're talking about and the success for the patients ultimately we're all trying to pursue.
Thank you, Preston. Thank you, Anthony and Ken. This concludes today's American College of Healthcare Executives webinar, Beyond the OR, Why Leading Health Systems Are Integrating Anesthesia into Perioperative Services. We appreciate you sharing your expertise and experience in redefining the role of anesthesia to support perioperative readiness, postoperative recovery, and system-wide performance. In closing, ACHE would like to thank each of you and your organizations for what you do every day to provide quality healthcare to communities across the nation. As a reminder, You will receive a follow-up within the next day with links to the session evaluation form and handout. Today's program is copyrighted in 2026 by the American College of Healthcare Executives. All rights reserved. Thank you again for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you at a future presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you.